Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Angie Bywater, and you're looking at the screen at Louise Byfield, my network co-manager of the Environmental Biotechnology Network, and Professor Sonia Heaven, who's going to talk to us a little bit about. Ooh, I'm getting a bit of feedback here about the Environmental Biotechnology Network in a moment. We've got apologies. I don't know if you can see on the chat. We've got some apologies from Denise, who has just had to make a quick swap to another computer. So she'll be joining us in a few minutes. Hopefully, fingers crossed that the technology plays. Meanwhile, we thought we'd kind of introduce you to the EB network and our sort of remit. Feel free. I was going to say, Sonia, probably for anybody to ask any questions at any time. Either in the chat or we'll have, the idea is this is supposed to be kind of informal and give you a chance to ask questions and for us to try and think about some of the things that you're thinking about as well. So on that note, I'll hand over to Sonia to give you a little bit more information about the Environmental Biotechnology Network.
Okay, thanks, Angie. Yes, just to repeat that, Angie and Louise can tell you a little bit more about the competition, and I think Denise, when she manages to join us, she will say something. But I was asked to say a little bit about EBNet, the Environmental Biotechnology Network, which is sponsoring this particular round of the competition. So I have got some slides. It's very informal. I'm happy if you want to ask a question at the end, stick it in the chat, ask me, ask us afterwards, and Angie and Louise and I can all offer answers, possibly in different ways. Yeah. So I'll do a quick share of a screen, but don't worry, I don't think that this is death by PowerPoint. I just need to make it happen. Oops, okay. Angie, are we looking at the right thing here? Can you see? You may be able to see, but I can't hear.
Yes, we can.
We're good.
Oh, that's great. Okay, sorry, Angie, I couldn't see your picture. I've got it now. Okay, guys, so very quick bit of background to Environmental Biotechnology Network. So the Environmental Biotechnology Network is one of 6 networks so-called networks in industrial biotechnology and bioenergy, commonly shortened to NIBS, funded by the UK government's research councils. You can see the titles of them there, and if you're interested in what they're doing different topics that they're covering, we're very happy to tell you a little bit about that. The reason that the UK government and the research councils were keen to fund this area was basically because you'll all have very different backgrounds. I don't know what you work in, but we are actually living at a moment of huge opportunity. There's a revolution going on in biological science and analysis, giving us insights quite unprecedented from the genetic level up to how microbial communities operate. There's also advances in engineering and technology that are maybe not quite so dramatic, but the reason that we kind of want to pin them together in this is because in this kind of system, they are highly interactive because we're dealing with living organisms. So if you change the temperature or what you feed them on, or even how you stir them, then the way that they behave actually changes. So if you like, the engineering and the biology are very strongly linked. And if we want to get some of these really fundamental insights to move forward up to the point where we can apply them to the real world, then we actually need people who can start right from the fundamental science level, but can collaborate and talk to people all the way up through technology, marketing, and the public and public opinion. And that's kind of why we're going for this Green Stories competition, to cover a little bit more about, well, what's the opinion of the public, what's their understanding, what do they mean, what do they think we mean by environmental biotech.
With the video and audio of me, Tim.
Okay. So I'm just briefly going to talk about some of the challenges that environmental biotechnology faces. Well, what do we mean by environmental biotech? I've worked all my professional career in wastewater treatment and engineering, solid waste management, not really much in bioremediation of contaminated land, but it's that sort of sector. And I could say actually that probably one of the challenges is, compared to some of the really kind of fancy biomedical pharmaceutical bits of biotechnology, it's not seen as being all that glamorous. We're dealing with low value products. Very few people, when they first hold their child in their hands, think one day this person will be a wastewater engineer. So we have an image problem. But we hope that in the next couple of minutes we can convince you it's a hugely important and exciting area, partly because we have about 8 billion customers. We have to provide a service 24/7. A lot of people haven't got the level of service we want, and it's got to be affordable. So you could say the challenges are probably rising demand because the population is growing, because we have higher standards. We want to do less damage to the environment. And because there are some new challenges, things like emerging pollutants, microplastics, pesticides that didn't exist in the past. But we've also got finite resources, and I guess I don't need to say that in a time of cost of living crisis, that we can't just pile the costs onto the public, because we are all members of the public and we've got enough to pay for already. So what the environmental biotechnologists have to do is they have to come up with slick resource and energy efficient systems, and they also have to meet a whole set of other goals that people would like. So those breakthroughs in deep fundamental science are really what we need to kind of get us through this. Okay? So the aim of EBNet, and it's very wordy, but stay with it for a minute, it's to bring together natural and social scientists and engineers, and maybe by social scientists we're including arts and humanities, because it all has a part to play, to move discovery science, the really fundamental stuff, towards practical application in creating and optimizing engineered microbial systems where microbes are doing cleanup for us, for environmental protection, bioremediation and resource recovery. Very long aim, one network, but a lot of areas. So some of us are kind of interested in the pollutants themselves and the media they occur in, soil, water, air. Some of us, like me, are particularly interested in this interaction between, well, how does the biology interact with the systems that we're building, and how can we make it better? But probably most important for this topic, for Green Stories, is there's a trade-off, there's an interaction between what's feasible, techno-economics, and what society will accept, what it wants, and what the environment can bear. So all of those trade-offs kind of come together to make the space that the network is operating in. Okay, and then we need to start thinking out of the box a bit. Okay, very quickly, the network, it's running for 6 years. We are in the last year and a half, 2 years of it. It had about 2.2 million of funding, which sounds a lot, but it included money for actual research projects and for interaction with industry to try and get researchers and industry going together. We have a fantastic, very nice team. You'll recognise Angie and Louise. Juma might be here too, I'm not sure. But probably most importantly, we have over 1,200, maybe over 1,300 members from industry and universities and other organisations right across the UK. We've got some key industry partners and participants, and you'll recognise a few names that have been hitting the headlines there, not necessarily for very good reasons, things like sewage pollution in rivers and so on. We've got government bodies because they want to know how to fix this and how to fix it affordably. And we've also got international expertise giving us a bit of advice. The things that we actually want to produce from this network, we don't have masses of money to give away and solve the problems, but we kind of want to give the government and the regulators, people like the Environment Agency and the Waste Management Authorities, support to know, well, what is the best policy? And evidence so that they can say, why are we doing this rather than something else? we want outputs from some of the research we're funding, not just because it's aimed to solve problems, but actually because we want to kind of showcase the power of this sector and the importance of it. As I say, it's not the most glamorous, but it's at the heart of all of a more sustainable economy. Yeah. And we want to interact with industry in new ways. But maybe the most important thing we want is a generation of, I shouldn't say young, but new researchers and professionals who can work across those boundaries and can communicate with each other. And that's, again, a reason why we wanted to sponsor the Green Stories. So we want people who will say not, oh, I'm embarrassed, I work in the sewage, but actually, I'm an environmental biotechnologist. I'm here trying to solve some of the world's pollution problems. And all of that is to address big challenges in the UK and worldwide, and also probably to help the UK economy to build that capacity. So that's the Environmental Biotechnology Network. I hope I haven't spent too long or told you things you already know, but I'll just pick up those last points. What we need to do is we need to take stuff from fundamental science, take it through the engineering, see what the impacts are, good and bad, on society, the economy, the environment, and see if we can get it into real world application. But all of those things have to interact to come up with the right solutions. And as I say, that's kind of where the Green Stories fits in. Okay, that was my description of what EBNet is and does, and I'm hoping that we might have Denise with us by now. I'll try and stop sharing this screen. Yes, Denise, great. I can see you.
Thank you, Sonia. Yes, I'm here. Sorry for being late. I couldn't seem to get sound on my university computer, so I've come home. So yeah, the Green Stories writing competitions, we've done 19 now, and they're free. And the aim is really try to reach a wider audience than you might do otherwise with green solutions. So that's the broad remit. This is sort of probably the most out there of the competitions we've done, but I was very much encouraged by how successful our last short story competition was, called Clean versus Green, where we, Sonia, jump in if I'm interrupting, if I'm repeating anything you've said, but that where we found that a lot of people were over cleaning and they misunderstood the difference between bacteria and viruses. They didn't realize that most of the bacteria on our skin are friendly bacteria. So, you know, showering too hot, showering too often, shampooing too often, laundering your stuff too hot, using very harsh, you know, kill 99% of bacteria cleaners. None of these are that great for your health, actually, and they're certainly bad for the planet. So we provided some information and people sent in stories that kind of engaged with that content in such a wonderful variety of ways. We had couples therapy, where one person's messy, another one is OCD. We had a little girl who was shrunk down to the size of bacteria and meets the, you know, the other bacteria hanging out on her skin. We had all kinds of ones. We had a romance about someone who had a cleaning business and learned a lot that worried her. So I thought, actually, this can be a really nice sort of technique to encourage people to think about things in a slightly different way and engage them in a topic in a way that perhaps, you know, most mental biologists just aren't able to do. They don't, you know, they have different set of skills. So what I wanted to do today is really put this over to you, the writers who are, you know, playing around with ideas, who want feedback, who want to brainstorm. So I would suggest either put your hand up or put a message in the chat, share what you're planning on doing, or if you've got any questions, and we'll just go through them one by one, and either myself or the EBNet team will answer. So over to you for your questions.
So I always know how uncomfortable it is to speak up and kick off and ask things here. We have the same problem all the time with our students. It's much nicer if you can be in the same place. But I just wondered, Louise, is it worth you saying a little bit about what we have to do when we get ideas or something? Would that might help people kick off? Oh, hang on, there is a question. So.
Oh, you're thinking about a murder mystery type story. Sharon, would you feel happy to talk to us properly rather than by the chat, so we can have a little sort of brainstorm around it? We'll unmute and tell us all about it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research into different types of microbial sort of engineering. So I was going sort of down the idea of there's like a student who's joined a team of researchers, and she hits upon this really difficult problem that they've been struggling with for a while, which is a real thing. It's a real thing that obviously that's out there, is when some of the cow's digestion is for digesting plastic, but she hits upon it as you know, when they've been struggling to make it sort of a large scale system. She helps them to achieve it, and then she's going to end up dead. So
okay.
It's her death that the microbes are coming to the rescue, because the microbes are going to actually help solve the mystery of her death. So
I love a whodunit, because whodunits are intrinsically got that hook. So in terms of the genre, love it. In terms of the science, over to you, Louise.
Well, from our point of view, we have no idea on what makes a good story, a good narrative, a good emotional sort of hook. That is entirely up to Denise, who's run these competitions over and over again. At EBNet, we're more focused on just making sure that it's got something to do with environmental biotechnology. So from our point of view, when the stories come in, we'll just do a very simple check, which is there anything environmental biotechnology in it at all? Good, you're through. Is it an overall positive sort of message? So there can be jeopardy and there can be sort of some kind of, you know, problem going on. But overall, if you read the story to the end, is there a positive message? Because we're not sort of aiming to, I know you're looking at me, Sonia, but that's the point of the story, to try and get people familiar and aware that we can do good things for the environment. And the last one is it factually incorrect? You know, so if there's something where an educated reader would go, oh my God, no, I can't believe you think that you can get microbes to train dinosaurs to make rocket ships. That's you know, if there's something so out there that we think, no, that's just not even, you know, feasible, that would probably get us get our attention. Apart from that, the only just, you know, problem with the stories, the way you'd win is Denise. She needs to tell us how good stories work, because we can't tell you that. We don't do that. It's not our thing. This is why we've reached out in the first place.
So yeah, a good story has a hook, has a story arc. The main character wants something. There's obstacles in getting it. Quite often there's jeopardy. They overcome those obstacles and everything is resolved. So with a whodunit, it could be the detective wanting to solve the murder. With a thriller, it's someone wanting to find, you know, it's the victim wanting to escape or the murderer wanting to find their victim. So for me, it fits it seems like there's a nice story arc there. Does that, Louise and Sonia, as far as you know, meet the microbial test, or is there anyone they can ask for advice on whether they've got it right?
Well, we have an email address that you can send queries to if there's something you're particularly concerned about. But really, if we've got a very broad remit here, if you think about anything to do with microbial systems, and if you're within that sort of arena, you're probably us.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Sharon?
Yes, that's fine. I wasn't sure if the you know, the whodunit murder mystery thing would fit in with all this science, but I don't want to make it too science heavy, so people are reading it going, oh, this has all been jammed in, you know, sort of shoehorned in to make it fit the topic. But I'll try my best.
But I always think the most precious thing is the reader's attention. So unless you've got that, whatever you put in there, you know, is kind of not that relevant. So yeah, you can't overburden it, I think. So now let's have a look. We had a question. Is there a specific genre? No, I wouldn't say so. And a question is the topic of PGPB included? Now that's, I don't even know what that is. That's over to you guys.
But could whoever asked the question, I think it's Dolly Joy, could you explain what PGPB is?
I Googled it and got plant growth promoting bacteria to boost plant development and promote soil bioremediation. Is that right? By secreting metabolites and hormones. So if it's soil bioremediation. Yep.
Would that count?
Well, we are actually about sort of environmental protection, bioremediation and resource recovery from waste. So if it's agricultural, purely to make plants grow faster, I think possibly that would be pushing the boundaries. If the bacteria were also cleaning something up at the same time, like nutrients, say the land was overfull of nutrients, which is a real problem. When they say it's a nitrate vulnerable zone, they don't mean that we're vulnerable because we've run out of nitrates. They mean we've dumped so many nitrates on the soil that if you add any more, it's got toxic. Too much of a good thing. So yes, if you're cleaning up some kind of environmental problem. Yes, if you're preventing an environmental problem. And yes, if you're trying to take an existing process and make something more of it, make it more efficient, do it in a better way, or you know, provide us something new. But that sounds a little bit agricultural. Can I pass that on to Sonia, who is the expert on this?
Well, no, I'm familiar with the idea, but I guess the only two things I can add to what Louise says is we argue lots about this kind of stuff ourselves, because I showed you the photo of the team, and we have people from different backgrounds with a different focus and so on. In the end, we've had to narrow the network down so that it is looking primarily at microbial systems, whereas at the beginning we were arguing, well, should it include plants and, you know, broader technologies? But it's already a very big topic. We've got solid waste management, we've got wastewater treatment, we've got pollution remediation in contaminated land, contaminated water, contaminated air. So we decided we needed to narrow it down to microbes, particularly because, as Denise said at the beginning, you know, lots of people think of microbes as just bad and they don't realize how many good things they do. I suppose if you make beer or bread, you might appreciate them a bit. So yeah, if the science doesn't have to kind of overwhelm the story, it absolutely shouldn't. The story is the key point. But ideally, it should have some pollution remediation, pollution tackling element. It's there are other networks, and we might try and persuade some of them to fund other rounds in the Green Stories competition, where their focus is more on, oh, can we make new products? Can we develop plants or things that will produce, as I say, pharmaceuticals or bioplastics or whatever? I guess actually that one more small thing. Yes, I mean, basically, waste management, wastewater treatment, it's not the glamorous end of the market. You're not dealing with high value products. Some people might make a bit of money out of it because they come up with such a good solution that, as I say, there are 8 billion potential customers in the world. Everybody uses the shower, throws away rubbish, etc. Yes. So if you can think of a really good system, you might be able to sell that to people. But generally, we're not talking about making huge profits or anything. But obviously, therefore, if you've got something which cleans up pollution and produces valuable plants that can be used in some other way for energy, for food, for livestock feed, then that cuts the cost of the cleanup. So Louise is really tough sometimes, and she's, oh, you know, is that quite in our remit? But actually, we're interested in good ideas and human stories. So yes, it sounds fine to me. That sounds like you've got the topic, you've nailed the microbes, yes. But just that comment that our focus is on the environmental cleanup and prevention of pollution. So rather than the get rich quick stuff.
So does that answer your question? While I wait here, we've got another question from Jodie. Can the stories be for adults or children? So from my perspective, I think adults and young adults are really good. And if you do it for children, you are engaging the adults too, because they're reading them to them. And there's an opportunity for illustrations, and a picture can say 1,000 words. So I'm happy, but what about you, Sonia, Louise?
Guys, I would be happy with any good stories that reach out in a way that the scientists, technicians, engineers don't always manage to. I think that's what we would like. My colleagues are nodding, and I'm sure that the other members of the team would agree. Yes, no, very welcome.
We've got another question. Can one write about biotech as it affects or in relation to just an individual, or should it have to be on a larger scale? Again, that's over to you.
I think, again, individual is fine. And it can be, it has an effect on somebody's life, what they've done, what they've worked on, what they're interested in, or maybe a tragedy that's affected them, an obstacle they've overcome. As Louise and Angie says, we don't even have to have a directly happy outcome. We do just like the idea that people are a bit more aware of how important and how powerful this sector is, if you see what I mean, how much of it supports us in our everyday life, and that it isn't all bad, nasty stuff that you don't want to hear about. But it can be the background to an individual story. Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to reading some of these. Are you?
So we got another question from Laura. So she's only just found out about this. Do you have to be a scientist to use biotech? Could a story include a character stumbling across a particular use of microbes?
I can't see why not. I mean, scientists already know about what's going on. So the idea of a character who's coming to it fresh would allow you to just explain something in a organic way in the story, in a way that you wouldn't if you were a scientist talking to another scientist. I'm not really, I don't do stories, but I just imagine that is true. And if Denise has an opinion, please do step in. I can't see any problem with that.
I like the idea. A really good point for a story is you always need an inciting incident. Something has happened. So if they are new to this and perhaps felt negatively and then found out the uses, then the reader is also going on the journey that we want them to go on along with the character. So Laura, do you have a story idea in mind? Do you want to talk about something more specifically?
Hi. No, I'll put my camera on so I can say hello. No, I literally just listening to this, I've started to sort of have ideas. But I write young adult fiction, and so I'm always my stories tend to have a teenage protagonist, and I was just thinking about if there could be a story where a teenager there's some problem in their community and they hit upon this somehow as a way of solving that problem. So trying to make a teenager the protagonist means, of course, they wouldn't be a scientist with lots of expertise. And
work experience. When you're at school, you often have to do a work experience thing, so that might be a nice way in.
Yeah, it's about how to give them the sort of autonomy, and they could have a sort of mentor, I suppose, a scientist who was kind of helping them. microbes that clean up like soil or pollution, say, like what do they look like, and how do you apply them? You know, like what? So if I was describing a story where you had a teenager and they were doing work experience, and this is all completely off the top of my head, it's not it's not a plan, but and they had there was, say, a field that was polluted and they needed to clean it up, because then they could save, you know, I don't know, the pony or the crop or the something, and the scientist said, oh well, this is what you need to do. Like, how do you do that? What's it look like?
I'll try hopping in, but Louise and Angie, you can kick me under the table if you wish and say no, try another tack. That's an interesting question. We haven't got we have people who work specifically on that and who actually do what they call prospecting for organisms. Because if you think about something, say, maybe it's an oil spill or you know, some unpleasant chemicals that have gone onto soil or the coastline or whatever. And sometimes if they're things created by, you know, by humans, there isn't initially anything at all that can break them down. Nothing that, because microbes break down pollutants, usually because they regard them as food. They can make a molecule, they can split up a molecule and get some energy from it, just as we can eat a sandwich, yes? So they have to develop the right systems for doing that. They have to kind of learn to recognize it as food and get the right enzymes to split it up and to be able to pass that on to the next generation of organisms. So what some scientists do is they actually go around looking in places where there has been pollution. It might be, as I say, oil spills. It might be old gasworks in a city. It might be a factory that used to give out very polluting discharges and has really spoiled a river or a lake or something. And they will sample organisms from that. And then they'll try growing them in the lab in an environment where maybe there's a really high concentration of that pollutant and see, can any of them make it? Can they do it? Can they survive? And then you might get something that's adapted to break down that organism. That's kind of the traditional way of doing it. That's known as prospecting. But actually, with a lot of very clever techniques coming in now, people are starting to try and work out, well, how do they do it? Can we actually modify organisms to make them better at it? You could have a bit of an argument. In fact, we often do, again, within the network about, well, do you really want to genetically modify organisms and put them out in the environment? At the moment, that's very strictly controlled. Governments won't let you do it. And you can see why, you know, if we start tinkering with things and setting them loose, what happens, yes. So mainly it's about this idea of trying to find organisms that exist in nature that are learning to break things down and trying to help them do it more efficiently, breed them up, increase the concentration and bring them into contact with your pollutant. So actually, I think your example is really nice. I like the idea that maybe, I don't know, maybe your teenager finds a spot where this place seems to be cleaning itself up. What's special going on here? It's your story, but I love the idea.
Can you have microbes named after people, like if you discover a planet? So that might be nice. Also, because I know what writers are like, I'm sure most of you are immediately thinking, great, I want a thriller with a Bond villain who's using microbes to destroy the world. So I do just have to remind you that the overall, you know, perspective on it is supposed to be positive, even though it's much more fun to write the more negative, terrifying ones. We do need to keep the positive.
Just one more question. Once you've got you in your lab, you've got your microbes that have proven to be actually pretty good at clearing up this oil or plastic or excess nitrogen. Would you, how would you apply it to a field or to a bit of water? I mean, would you sort of spray it on, or would you yeah like how do you get microbes into the environment. I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to answer the door as well.
Sure.
So I'll turn my camera off, so
Sure.
I'm going to keep listening.
Well, we can come back to that one. It's a good idea. And also, I think it wouldn't hurt to know what they look like. Could anyone go on Google and maybe post an image in the chat or something? Because you'd want, as a writer, to describe someone perhaps at some point looking at one. What does it look like? So that bacteria look great under a microscope. There's all kinds of wacky shapes and sizes. So I think Laura was asking.
I guess the key thing is they are small. They are just one cell, single organism. And they are amazingly clever. They can live from really high temperatures, really high salinity, salt, really low temperatures, things that would be poisonous to most animals, high pressures. They live in the bottom of the sea, right down in the deep ocean vents where there's no sunlight. And as I say, and that's kind of why, if you look at the microbial world, you can often find something that can treat a pollutant. But
so sorry, Sonia, I just interrupted. I was going to give a couple of practical examples on that. So, for example, one of our researchers was found microbes that would eat the oil when there was the BP spill. So the idea is, could you just introduce that in another oil spill? So in other words, they're using microbes that are in the environment. Of course, like Sonia said, they could be supercharged. I have a little anaerobic digester in my house, and the way we got the microbes working in that is we just took some cow slurry, because it's the way cows' stomachs work. We put it in there, and the microbes grow just like they would in a fermentation, and it makes biogas, and then it makes fertilizer so that I can grow more plants. Interestingly enough, because there's microbes in the digestate that grow more plants, it means that it affects the microbes in the soil. So sometimes we just find microbes that are doing useful things and we put them somewhere else. The same with sewage treatment works. They will just grow naturally because they're around, and if you give them food, they'll grow. As scientists, people like to try and supercharge them and maybe add some supercharged microbes to things. But remember, in our environments, we have microbes that are quite variable in terms of, it's like an ecosystem. So it's like a forest of microbes that work together. Some microbes eat something and produce something that the next lot of microbes eat. So in the anaerobic digester, they'll start off with all this food, they'll break it down into different bits, and what will end up happening, the carbohydrates will be broken down, the fats will be broken down, the same as it works in your stomach. So the microbes are kind of in the environment, and they're not like larger organisms. They just change, they morph to be able to do amazing things. Which is why it was really interesting when they found ones that would eat oil and things like that.
So we've got Laura. Are you back? I'm not sure.
Yes, I am.
We haven't answered the question of how you would apply it. Would you spray it? Would you?
I can have a go at that one.
Yeah.
You can, if you can find a bug that does something you want, you can try to grow it up, kind of in the same way as I say, you grow yeast for a bakery or something. It's a big vat, and you feed it on the right materials until the numbers increase, and you can then try applying it out in the environment. However, that might work, but very often the reason we have referred earlier in our description of what the network does is we talk about engineered microbial systems. So, for example, what we might try to do is to bring some kind of a container and feed the soil through, maybe mix it with water, pump it through, expose it to the microbes, and then take the soil out, we hope, clean. Yeah. To be honest, dealing with things like that when the pollutant is actually out there in the environment, it's in the sea, it's in the water, it's in the soil, that's the hardest part. the much easier, but the better way to do it is to do something. Somebody had a question about it, about sewage works, where what we try to do is we say, okay, we've got contaminated water, wastewater. Before we put it in the river, we'll put it through a series of processes where we can expose it to organisms that are good at breaking down those pollutants or capturing them. And then we separate them out, and that's the engineering bit, the ways that we can do that and make the process efficient and quick, and return the water to the environment so that it is clean enough. And I know just at the minute, anyone who watches the news in this area, there's rather a lot of water companies that haven't been doing that. And I worked in the water industry myself many years ago, and I'm certainly not apologising for them. They need to do better. But you get the idea that we are trying to take processes which are basically natural. They are done by living organisms that exist independently of humans, but we're trying to give them the best conditions so they can do it more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively.
Now we've got quite a few, thanks for that, Sonia. We've got quite a few questions coming via chat. So can we go through them relatively quickly so we can make sure we get through them all, then we can return to them later if we end up with more time. Yeah, and they might have been answered already, but quite a few people have arrived halfway through. So says, would it be fine if the story tackles prevention of disasters and remediation of a depleting ecosystem using microbes to alleviate these kinds of situations?
Sounds perfect.
That's what I thought. Does deploying microbes in helping to clean up pollution and tackle certain health problems have any negative or adverse effect as an aftermath, more like side effects?
That's a cracking question. I'm sorry, Angie and Louise, you know you have to shut me up, mute me if you think I'm... But, for example, that's when you might have heard the phrase emerging pollutants. And that tends to be when humans have created a chemical. Maybe it's a pesticide or a herbicide or even a plastic. And a microbe learns to cut it up into smaller bits. And just occasionally, those smaller bits can be worse for us. And that's a problem that didn't even exist before, and one that we have created, and one that people are now watching, looking very carefully for those. So generally, breaking down a pollutant, what you really want is you want to take it all the way through, just back to basic things like oxygen, nitrogen, things that are in the air and in the soil and do us no harm. But sometimes on the way, you can actually have a bigger problem. So it's a very good question.
So would that be, so for example, breaking down oil would probably be all right, but breaking down plastic could lead to microplastics. Would that be a good example?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Okay. And say, can you please tell me, how does wastewater plant work and how do microbes help in it? This is someone who isn't from a science background, so
maybe we should give a little plug to our video clip.
Yeah.
Angie, Louise, does that seem the best thing to do? I mean, I can tell you I'll try and do it very swiftly, but it's been known for a long, long time, more than 100 years, that if you take dirty water, wastewater, and you pump air through it, there's enough microbes present, and the microbes can take oxygen and break down organic material that's in the wastewater. The thing that we do to make it work better in sewage works is, okay, those microbes, that community that has adapted and evolved, it's got used to that food, it's got familiar with it. So if we find ways to keep them, and the simplest way is actually just to let them settle out and collect them. So you used to have one microbe, it's eaten, it's reproduced, it's split in half, now you've got two. You used to have two, now you've got 4, 8, 1,000, 1,000,000, yes? So a lot of the way a sewage treatment works is by saying, let the microbes adapt to the food and then find a way to keep them in the system so that you've got a system that's very adapted and capable of processing that material. They exist out there in the environment, but there might be, you know, 1 in every litre of river water. We try to get thousands and hundreds of thousands in every litre so that we can process that pollution quickly. Have a look at the video clip. Is there a link? Can someone stick it in the...
I'm just typing in a link now. There we are.
Perfect. Okay. But believe me, we love this subject. We could bore the pants off you on it. So feel free to get in touch.
So we have a few. When you say the microbes morph, does it mean the bacteria can change behaviour according to environmental circumstances?
Well, yes. Oh, sorry. Shall I step in and say something?
No, you go for it. It's time I shut up.
They have plasticity, so they have an array of strategies they could take depending on the circumstances they're in. So that could be biochemical. So if there's oxygen around, they will do things in a particular way. They will break things down in a particular order. If there's not oxygen around, they will choose a different way of doing things. But they have the options available. And the weird thing about bacteria is they're not like animals and plants. They don't come together in twos and pass genetic material down the way we expect them to do. Often they take one trait, one little trick that they can do, and they put it on a tiny circle of DNA and pass it as a plasmid, which is just a tiny circle with one handy trick in. They pass it just freely around from any bacteria to any other bacteria, which is why traits like antimicrobial resistance spread so quickly. It's not that you need one particular bacteria that invents it, and then you have to wait until, you know, that bacteria spreads and takes over the world. It will just spread it out because it's useful. Sorry, they're very fascinating things.
That was really interesting. You seem to be using the word bacteria and microbes interchangeably. Is that okay?
No, that's a bias. There's also microalgae and fungi and protozoa. There are viruses. They can act individually, or these things can act individually, or they can use, they actually talk to each other with things called quorum sensing molecules, which is basically chemical signals. So they can talk to each other depending on what have circumstances changed. One of them says, circumstances have changed. Hey, everyone, let's all clump together because it's got a bit rough out here. Let's all clump together and make a sort of a slime ball so that we can protect ourselves. And they do little chemical messages, and that helps them all act in different ways than they would if they were sort of floating around freely in liquid. So that they've got an arsenal of different behaviours and communications and ways of being, which means that they're very adaptable to what goes on in their environment.
So are all bacteria microbes?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that they are all very, very tiny. You would need a microscope to see any bacteria, yes.
And it's got here, do all microbes help to clear pollutants?
No, it depends on the pollutants. Obviously, there's almost like a hierarchy of pollutants in that if you're feeding them something like glucose, you could say, I've just poured golden syrup over a field and there's too much golden syrup and plants don't like it. The microbes are going to go, sugar, and they're all going to go for it. If you did something like an emerging pollutant, some very recalcitrant, hard to break down chemical, the reason it's an emerging pollutant is because lots and lots of microbes have tried to eat it and they can't. It takes a lot of efforts and potentially more energy to break down than you would get out by breaking it up. So it's like taking a car to an old broken down car to a breaker's yard. If it's a car made of gold, everyone's going to rush and try and break that up because it's useful to them. And if it's a really horrible car and you're going to spend days breaking it down and you're only going to get tuppence, no one touches it.
Yeah.
And it's the same with microbes. Different pollutants have different use and value to them, sometimes because they're not adapted to it, but sometimes just because the pollutant itself is just so darned tricky to break down that it's just not worth the effort for anything to do it on purpose. They might do it by accident. They might be living their lives and creating a reactive oxygen species or something that just happens to leak out and slightly break down that thing that they happen to be standing next to. But that would be an accident. And of no value to the microbe. So, yes, someone stop me because I'm wittering on here. But
I'll stop you because we've got another We got another bit in the chat. It says, I found out there's different types of microbe. Is there a specific type of microbe that's more effective in cleaning up a polluted environment?
No, as Louise said, it very much depends upon, what is pollution? It's going to be some kind of chemical, and whether the microbe can break that chemical structure down. And like Sonia said, it could break it down into something that's worse than you started off with, or it could break it down into something that is benign. But it's going to be a specific, microbe or group of microbes, I think, that would break down specific pollutants. So you can't just say there's this microbe that breaks down, pollution.
Okay, so this question, I'll go first turn on answering it, and then I'll pass it over to you. Are you looking for more scientifically accurate stories with a creative writing touch, or the opposite? Or should the science and the fiction be more or less 50-50 balanced in a story? So I just wanted to say something we've done in previous Green Stories competitions, and we can see if we can do this here. If we've had a really great story, but it's just got some of the technical aspects wrong, I'm always happy to go back to the writer and say, look, actually you got this bit wrong, but it's a really good story. If you'll rewrite it and resubmit, we'll take another look and consider you, because no one can be expert on everything, and sometimes the best writers are not the best at the science. So if that's okay with you, I'd rather have an option if we need it to go back and just say, just tweak it a bit, and this is where you got it wrong. But in terms of the mix, I don't know. Balancing creative writing and story with information is such an art. It's hard to do it well. Some writers can put a lot of information and really make it work. Quite often male writers go into huge amounts of detail that would bore me to read, but other readers seem to love it. And others, it'll come across as, info dumping, and it just won't work. So that is part of the art, really. I don't know if anyone else has any more to say to that.
I think don't over science it. Think about the story. If the science has given you the excuse, the basis for the story, or if it's given you the solution to the problem or the background to it, that seems fine to me. The story is more interesting and more important. Yes. Because if you think of the questions we're having now, lots of people haven't thought about this before, and I'm sure Angie and Louise are the same. We all had to explain to our parents and our children and all the rest of it what we do. Yes. So
I agree.
That's a very valuable step on the road just by itself. The story matters more than the science. We'll try and get the science right, but you're not there to, write a manual on how to run a sewage plant. You're really not.
Yeah, I think 1 point made well so the reader cares about it is better than 20 points made poorly. So there's two more questions so far. So why is sewage in rivers a problem? Is it because efficient systems don't exist to clean it beforehand, or because they're not implemented properly?
Angie and Louise, do you mind if I grab that one, just because it's my, I know you can, but so, okay. There are systems that can clean up wastewater, but historically they just kind of developed. People thought, oh, towns are getting bigger, we're polluting a river, we'll do a bit of cleanup. Now we need to do a bit more and a bit more. So there is no need to pollute a river, but we're now all living in a time when we realise not just about environmental pollution, but about resources and resource recovery. So, for example, only about half the people in the world have good wastewater treatment, enough to protect the environment, and yet we're already using probably 3 or 4% of the world's energy on that. So there's kind of two things going on. We have got good systems, but not everyone's got them. And we also need them to be better, to be more resource efficient, cheaper, more effective. Yeah. So if it's not happening, it's not because we can't do it, but sometimes we have to think about how can we afford it.
Another question is, if the bacteria are able to create another byproduct that would help, no, hang on. If the bacteria are able to create another byproduct that would help another organism to help with pollution cleaning. Not sure I quite understand the question.
Angie, maybe AD is your nice example there, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, you can imagine that if somebody, I don't know, had just threw a bunch of food waste into the environment, what a mess it would be. Whereas with anaerobic digestion, we have microbes that'll break down things at the very initial stages. So it'll take the carbohydrate and break it down into constituent parts, and some of those parts, so acetic acid, like vinegar, that would be eaten by other microbes, and those microbes might make biogas. So it's a bit like your digestion. The microbes in your stomach give you energy. In our case, in anaerobic digestion, it gives people energy in the form of biogas and fertilizer. So there are groups of microbes where the end product is, if you like, the pollution control.
And the last question so far, I'm pretty sure the answer to this is no. Oh no, we've got more questions coming in. Does the topic need to be related to research carried out by someone at EBNet?
No.
So as long as it's thematically relevant. Okay. And currently, do criminal forensics use bioengineering to solve cases, or would they have access to a scientist?
Can I give an example of that one? Because one of my favorites has been where they do wastewater surveillance. So when there was COVID, they did a lot of wastewater surveillance, and they found COVID in the wastewater. But some of the other really interesting things is they can find illicit drugs at a community level in the wastewater. So if they went to your local wastewater treatment thing, they would go, oh my gosh, there's huge amounts of cocaine, or cocaine, we can see things where there's been a lot of cocaine use within this community. So they don't know where the people are, but they know that whoever it is flushing down the toilet in the community. So for example, they found out when there was, so you would be able to see in the city of London, they would find huge amounts of cocaine use during the week, but not during the weekends, because they'd all have gone home and nobody's snorting cocaine anymore. So from that point of view, in terms of forensics, we can't nail it down to a person, but you could nail it down to a community.
But do you know if the criminal, I'm guessing this ties into someone's plot idea. Would they know about microbes? So, I mean, maybe Sharon, it might help if you wanted to share your plot to see if it works. Or has that answered your question? Or if anyone else wants to talk a little bit more about their particular plots rather than more general things to see if they work. Oh, you started the chat with your plot.
The murder.
Oh, was that that was it? Was the murder mystery one? Yeah. So, okay. Is your question answered, or do you need a little bit more? Thumbs up. Anyone else? We're coming to the end, but this is the best opportunity you'll get to get feedback on whether your plot works. If we need to go over, I think at least one or two of the EBNet would be happy to stay on. So if you've got any more questions, now's the time. Right, well, what I might do is just talk you through briefly. I do recommend you check out the link I put in the chat to the web page. We provide a link to the best stories from our Clean versus Green competition, and you can download the stories there for free. I think there's 6 of the best. they really do give great ideas of the variety of ways you can introduce bacteria into a story. We'll open the competition up for entries. It's normally about a month before the deadline, and you can submit up to 2 entries. And you normally have to allow at least a couple of months for us to judge, but that can depend on how many entries we get. So are there any more questions on anything? Okay, well, I think, thank you, Sonia, Louise and Angela, for being the technical specialists, and everyone else for coming in. And I think we really look forward to reading what you come up with.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Look forward to it.
Yes. And as Angie says, we're very happy to try and answer any questions anyone's got, but mainly we're looking forward to reading.